So he's a PhD and a leading expert in AI and emerging technologies, CEO of Satalia. Satalia is an incredible AI business working with people like companies like Tesco and PwC. But beyond that, they have this mission to create a world where everyone is free to innovate, and those innovations become free for everyone. So he's got his Master's and Doctorate in AI at UCL. He's also a UCL computer science entrepreneur in residence and a lecturer at LSE's Marshall Institute, focused on AI to solve business and social problems. And from what I've understood about this organization is it's flat, and people are remote and they work on what they want to work on, and they make their own decisions, and they choose how they want to work and where they want to work and how. And it sounds phenomenal, Daniel. So hopefully you'll share a bit more about that as we go. The space is yours. Grab 20 odd minutes or so, and we'll see you for questions at the end, if that sounds okay.
Yeah, it sounds great. Can you? I think this is the phrase of the decade. Can you hear me, and can you see my screen?
We hear you. We see you. Thank you.
Oh, okay. You can see the slides I'm presenting. Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So actually, I'm going to share today some thoughts that I haven't shared, I think, anywhere else. I do about probably 100 talks a year, whether they be board talks or keynotes. And I've got some content I'm very fortunate I can trot off without even thinking about it. But this time, I've set myself a challenge of sharing some thoughts and content and actually some hypotheses that I'd like to bounce off people in this group, because so a lot of this stuff I'm going to share with you hasn't completely formed in my mind, but I want to put it in all your heads, and I want you to also challenge me in some of my thinking. So I won't go into who I am. You've done a good job, thank you, of saying that. But so I want to get us all on the same page, first of all, with artificial intelligence. And then we're going to talk about its impact on organizations. And then what I want to do is I want to take a macro view at artificial intelligence's impact on society. So these are the three things that I'm going to cover. I usually go into a lot of detail about this, but I think we've got a lot of educated people on the call, many of the people actually that might have seen my talks before, so I won't bore you again. But when I build systems for companies, they usually involve three parts. They involve a data part, and many organizations are going on their digital transformation. They're all getting their data together because they have an instinct that they can use statistics, machine learning, data science to extract insights from that data to help them drive value in their business. And for the past 5 years, companies have been hiring data scientists, statisticians to try and find insights in data to help drive value. Now, I'm going to say something quite controversial, which is I would argue that companies don't have machine learning problems. They have decision problems. Ultimately, what you want to do is make decisions based on the insights that you're extracting. And I think that there's been a mass direction of funds hiring data scientists, many of my students actually, to solve problems that are actually decision problems. And decision making is a completely different field of computer science. They are logicians, they are experts at optimization, completely different field. And I would argue that you really are going to get the best value if you can harness these three elements. Combining your data, extracting insights from that data, and then making decisions from those insights. Now, I think that every company at the moment that touches this technology stack is calling themselves an AI company, and I would argue that actually there are two definitions of AI. The first definition is popular, but I think a little bit weak, which is getting computers to do things that humans can do. Getting computers to do things that humans can do. Now, the reason why this is a popular definition is because over the past 11 years, because of deep learning, we have seen we've been able to get machines to do things that traditionally were only in the domain of human beings. We're able to get machines to recognize objects and images, to correspond in natural language, to do things that we only used to be able to do. And because humans are the most intelligent thing we know in the universe, we then attribute that to be intelligence. And I think that there's some validity in there, but for many, many decades, we've been getting computers to do things better than humans. And for me, there's a better definition actually, which comes from the definition of intelligence, which is goal-directed adaptive behavior. So goal-directed in the sense you're trying to achieve an objective, you're trying to sell as many ice creams as you can, you're trying to allocate your employees as effectively as possible, you're trying to, whatever, you have to have an objective. Behavior is how quickly I can allocate my resources to achieve my objective. But the key word in this definition for me is the word adaptive. Ultimately, what you want to do is build systems that make decisions, that learn about whether those decisions are good or bad, adapt their own understanding of the world so that tomorrow you can make a better decision. And actually, I would argue that I haven't seen a single successful complex adaptive system yet in production in my life. But let's assume that the AI is both getting computers to do things that humans can do, and also building systems that can adapt themselves. So just to expand a little bit on that, there's kind of two flavors of AI. I don't know if anybody can recognize this painting. This is Socrates before he drinks hemlock and kills himself. Socrates is famous for inspiring the Socratic method. So if I say to you, Socrates is a man and all men are mortal, I can infer that Socrates is mortal. And AI in the 60s and 70s was us writing down lots of rules and then trying to then infer new knowledge from those rules. And it didn't really scale, it didn't really work. And then in the 80s and 90s, a new type of AI came along that we often refer to as deep learning or neural networks. This is actually the brain of a bumblebee. My PhD was to model bumblebee brains. Bumblebees have about a million neurons. Their brain can fit on the end of a needle. But bumblebees can do amazing things. They can navigate 3D worlds. They talk to each other. They solve problems. They don't handle windows very well. But ultimately, they're very smart creatures. And the question was, could you build a million neurons in a machine? And 15 years ago, when I was doing my PhD, it was impossible. But because of deep learning, because of this new paradigm in neural networks, we're now able to build brains that have hundreds of millions of neurons, and we're now able to teach these brains to do things that traditionally only human beings could do. Now, I would argue that these technologies are really good at finding patterns from data. But these technologies are not good at making decisions. Ultimately, what you want to do is find patterns from data using these technologies, and then use these technologies that I think are going to have a boom over the next 10 years to be able to make decisions, to be able to reason and optimize. And then what you need to do is build systems that adapt themselves in production. And so I would argue that if this semicircle here was the bounds of human ability, if this is the bounds of all of our human abilities, we could probably take any specific task that a human does, whether it's recognizing objects, images, or whether it's solving complex optimization problems. We can build an AI that can outperform humans almost any specific task. I'm not talking about creativity and things that require lots and lots of different skills, but I'm talking about very specific tasks. But it is costly and it is inefficient to build these individual systems that solve individual tasks. So there's lots of research and interest going into what is called artificial general intelligence. And I guess that's why humans are special. We are one system that can do many things. We are generally intelligent. And so what we're trying to now do is build systems that are able to do many things, one system that can do many things. And that's actually much more complex. And I think many of us will know this, but if we take this idea to its paradigm, to its extreme, we are likely to build within potentially our lifetime a brain that is smarter than us in every single possible way. And this is often referred to as superintelligence or the singularity. But it is predicted that it might happen within our lifetime. And nobody knows whether it's going to be the most glorious thing that happens to humanity or our biggest existential threat. And I would be keen to get the audience's opinion. I'm worried that it's our biggest existential threat, and I'm trying to figure out how do we mitigate this risk. So hopefully we're on at least the same page of AI, and I'm going to switch focus now, and I'm going to talk about innovation and where I'm seeing these technologies be used in organizations. Now, of course, AI and these technologies can be used to profile our customers and to be able to optimize our supply chains, to essentially sell more stuff and to also reduce our costs. But we're also starting to see AI change how organizations are structured. So this picture here that you're seeing is I guess a hierarchy. This is not a picture of Satalia, although most people do sell drugs to each other down here. This is quite common in my company. But this is not a picture of Satalia, but this is a hierarchy. And hierarchies breed certain types of interesting relationships that I do not believe are conducive for innovation. So for me, innovation the best definition of innovation that I've ever heard is by Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs said, innovation is creativity that ships. The most important word in that definition is the word that. That is the process of generating ideas and getting them to the point where somebody's willing to pay for them. And that process is long and hard. The shorter you can make that process, the more quickly you can adapt your organization to a changing world, the more intelligent you are. Adaptation is synonymous with intelligence. And what we need to do is we need to unlock the creative capacity of our employees to allow them to innovate, to adapt our organizations to a changing world. But these hierarchical structures are not conducive for that. So over the past decade or so, we've seen a flattening of organizations. We've seen the removal of middle managers. We've seen new tools come along to help us communicate more effectively, et cetera, et cetera. But I would argue that these flat organizations, these thin organizations are still broken. And actually, Satalia is only about 100 people, so we've got a long way to go to feel the pains of large organizations. But we operate like a swarm. And I'm not here advocating that a swarm is a better organizational structure than a hierarchy. What we're trying to do is build a platform that allow for different structures to emerge, whether they be swarm-like structures, flat structures, hierarchical structures, depending on the type of problem that you're trying to solve. So we operate very much like a swarm. We've got about 100 people distributed across the world. And the idea is that everybody can work on what they want, where they want, how they want. We have no traditional managers, no traditional hierarchies, and we use machine learning, we use AI to organize ourselves. So one crazy thing that we do is we ask everybody every year to make public recommendations. We've changed this now, but we ask everybody every year to make public recommendations for their salary, and everybody votes on whether those salaries should be reduced or increased or kept the same. And we use machine learning, we use AI to determine how many votes one person has for another. So if I've worked very closely with you over the past year, if I'm very knowledgeable about your domain, I will have more votes for your salary than somebody else. So this is an example of where we are augmenting human decision-making, i.e. saying whether your salary is accepted or changed, with machine learning or artificial intelligence that's determining how many votes you have. And we can apply this type of idea, we can apply this thinking to all decisions that are being made across a company, whether it's hiring people, whether it's resourcing, whether it's feedback, whatever. And if you can start applying some of these principles, you can remove the need to have any form of management or any form of hierarchies. But what's interesting, to enable these types of organizations, you need to understand what's going on in companies. You need to understand your assets. And in most companies, their assets are people. So what we do in Satalia is we pull all of our data together. We profile people based on their skills, based on their relationships, and we create these digital twins of our organization. So I can see, for example, if one of these two people leave the company, I get a silo between two parts of my organization. Now, it raises also lots of interesting ethical questions. So I can predict who are going to leave the company before they know they're going to leave the company. I can identify secret lovers in my company. So lots of interesting ethical questions are raised from having this type of view across your organization. But because more and more people are now going to be working from home because of COVID, companies are going to want to use your data to understand your activity, your productivity, your relationships, so this world is coming. So I'm going to switch now. I've only got about a few minutes left, but I want to switch now to the thing that I've been thinking about recently, which is the pestle of singularities. So we're going to now take a macro view. And I don't know if you've heard the term pestle before, but maybe you've done a business module or a business degree. But pestle is an acronym for political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. It's essentially, if you're analyzing a particular opportunity, it's a framework to allow you to understand if there are any macro risks associated with that idea: political risks, economic risks, social risks, etc. And over the past few years, I've been talking about AI, and I've been talking about the impact of AI on various different aspects of humanity. We've heard of the economic singularity, which I'll go into more details in a moment. We've touched upon the technological singularity, which is where we build a brain smarter than us in every single possible way. And I'd like to think actually there's a whole pestle of singularities. So this is new, and this is the first time that I'm going to be showing this. So Before I go into them, I want to just, I think we should acknowledge that those organizations that embrace these technologies, whether you're a government or a company, those organizations that embrace these technologies are probably going to win. Now, I would argue there's a massive amount of misinvestment and a misunderstanding about AI at the moment, but I do think that that will resolve itself over the next 5 years. But I do think that those organizations that do invest properly in these technologies will win. And actually, I don't know if anybody can tell me who gave this quote at the top here: the nation that leads in AI will be the rule of the world. This was actually Vladimir Putin that said this, I think, recently to a group of children. But anyway, we need to acknowledge that if you do invest in these technologies, then you are likely going to beat your competitors. And I have a bit of a problem with the word win, because winning often means somebody else losing. And my concern about the way that currently the world works is that we're going to be using these technologies to mass and amalgamate more GDP, more profit, and I don't think we're going to create a sustainable future for our species. And this now touches upon these 5 singularities that I want to share with you, or the 6 singularities that I want to share with you. So the first singularity I want to share with you is referred to as the social singularity, which is where all of our activities are being monitored, and we are reduced to a score, or we are reduced to a profile that is being used by organizations, that's being used by governments, that will reward and punish us. We know that the social scoring is being rolled out across China. We know that other jurisdictions around the world are starting to look at social scoring. We know that organizations are starting to look at people's data to essentially profile them. And this, again, raises lots of interesting ethical challenges. But this is the next singularities, where what does the world look like when everybody's activities are captured and profiled and scored? And I don't know what that world looks like beyond that. The next one I've been struggling with some time, but if anybody recognizes this picture, this is Tom Cruise in Minority Report. And in Minority Report, which is a film about being able to predict crime and stop that crime before it happens. And the legal singularity that I'm suggesting is a world in which we can predict crime before it happens, all criminal activity before it happens. What does our legal system look like? What does our jury system look like in that future world? The next singularity I want to talk about is the political singularity, and this probably scares me more out of all of them at the moment, which is, what does the world look like when we do not know what is true or false? Now we're seeing deep fake, we're seeing these technologies, chatbots, et cetera, starting to essentially look almost human-like, or behave almost human-like. And we don't know if that's a video of Donald Trump saying that stuff, or we don't know if that person that's phoning us is a real person. And so the question that I have is, what does the world look like if we do not know, if we cannot determine what is true or false anymore? And I do think that we are actually quite close to that time. The next singularity I've mentioned already, which is the economic singularity, which is at the moment we're using these technologies to free people up from their tasks so they can do more interesting things. But this drive to reduce profits, the drive to reduce costs and increase profits means that we will ultimately be removing people from whole jobs. And there is a concern that in the next 10, 15, 20 years, we will have mass job losses and people will not be able to retrain fast enough to be able to get new jobs. And this could cause a huge amount of economic unrest. And I sit on a number of think tanks that are concerning themselves about this and how we might be able to solve this particular problem. And the other singularity, which is not my domain, which I'm terming the environmental singularity, are all of the things that might create an unsustainable planet. So environmental risks such as climate change, antimicrobial resistance, COVID is an excellent example. This diagram that you're looking at here was a survey that was done in the World Economic Forum a few years ago, which was asking business leaders what the biggest risks are to your organization. And 3 of the biggest risks were environmental risks. And I think that we've got lots of environmental problems that we need to solve over the next decade. The final singularity I want to talk about is the technological singularity, which is where we build a super intelligence smarter than us in every single possible way. And my concern is, if we are still fighting each other over GDP, if we're still fighting each other over resources over the next 30 years, and when this thing comes along, it's probably going to see us as a threat and remove us from the equation. And I think that would be a shame, because I think that humans are cool. So my goal, my purpose over the next 30 years is figuring out, how do we get humanity cooperating cooperating as a species, so that when this thing comes along, it actually leaves us alone. So I've actually built this purpose into Satalia, and I think that the companies that are going to survive in the future are the ones that are not just making a profit, but the ones that are actually going to have a strong purpose. Because if you have a strong purpose, you're going to attract customers, and you're going to attract contributors, you're going to attract employees. Satalia's purpose is to create a world where everybody is free to live beyond themselves. There is no reason why everybody's nutrition, healthcare, education, all of that stuff could be met for free, giving people the ability to become entrepreneurs and philanthropists and use their time to give back to humanity. And that's the world that I want to create over the next 30 years. We've got lots of problems to overcome, and I think that those problems are going to be solved by companies having a strong purpose. So on that note, I'm going to stop and hand over to questions.
Daniel, thank you. Thank you so much. What an incredible speech. I'm going to have to listen to it again and slow it down to 0.85.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, not at all. Just so I can comprehend everything that you just said. Please join me on the chat here and just give a shout out and a thanks if you appreciated Daniel there talking us through that incredible journey. So I'll cancel that spotlight now. We have got 3 minutes if anybody just wants to hop their microphone on for a second, the camera, ask something of Daniel until 1:30.
Daniel, can I ask?
Yes.
Quickly. Yeah, you mentioned you're running. Do you define your organization as a DAO, distributed autonomous organization?
So the answer is we're trying, and I think there's lots of companies that think they are decentralized autonomous organizations, but I haven't seen a single company yet crack the problem of all of the different skills, HR, finance, leadership, bringing all of those skills together to drive forwards a truly decentralized organization. You can do it with software. Can you hear me okay?
You're back, yeah.
Yeah, now.
Yeah, so my headphones seem to cut out. So I haven't seen an example yet of where you can bring all of the skills together to drive forwards a business. You can do it with some skills, but my aspiration is actually to try and create a platform where anybody can boot up an idea around the world, and anybody can then contribute to that idea, whether you're a software developer, a designer, a HR expert, a finance expert. And actually, I want to get rid of this is going to sound bonkers, but I want to get rid of the concept of companies, and I want to get rid of the concept of countries from this planet. I think they're a silly idea. There's no reason why you can't have everybody be able to boot up ideas and people swarm around them to drive those ideas forward. So I actually want to create a world that's completely decentralized.
Can I just say thank you for an absolutely wonderful speech, and what a very, very, very good goal to have. Saving the planet seems really quite important, and from my point of view, perhaps a little more urgent than you've just said. And I suspect, just looking at you, that you've just been a little more polite than perhaps you. Do you not think things are slightly more urgent?
Do you know what? Over the past 2 years, I've been very much in the dystopian camp. And I've been deeply, deeply worried about the world, and I still am deeply worried about the world. But I also think that there's a roadmap, and I'm trying to inspire people about purpose and decentralization to help figure out how we can solve. So actually, now I think that we have hope.
I think there's always hope, because we are a remarkable species. It's a question of, have we arrived at the point where things are bad enough that people will actually get up off their bums and do something. It's about a change of behavior and about us breaking down some barriers that exist. And
So to answer your question,
I just think we're awfully close to the point where everybody's going, this is madness.
Yeah.
We really ought to fix things.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think we are close. I'm still very hopeful. That's why I'm here talking to you rather than spending the last years with my daughter. But yes, I am hopeful.
Find a way to do both. Trust me, I'm an old dad.
Indeed.
I'm hopeful too. Sorry, thank you.
Not at all. Thank you very much. Daniel, last question. We have run a minute now, but how do you switch off at night? How do you sleep?
my secret is, and this is again going to sound bonkers, is that it might look like, I assume that many of you have like a voice in your head or a narrative or multiple voices chattering away. That's very common. Actually, you might not know this, but a lot of people, some people don't. My head is empty. I honestly, there's nothing going on in there. All I hear is my voice and my arms waving around, and I just react to the world. So Google the not having an internal monologue, and there's quite a few things that are popping up about this weird, like people that have no internal monologue, but I don't. So I'm essentially always switched off.